Hi, I'm David Levine. I'm co-chairman of Science Writers in New York. My other co-chair, or my co-chair, Joseph Bonner, is invisible, but he's behind the scenes and he's responsible for this. My guest tonight is Carl Zimmer, who's an award-winning New York Times columnist and the author of 13 books about science. His latest book is She Has Her Mother's Laugh: The Powers, Perversions, and Potential of Heredity. So Carl, welcome. Thanks for doing this. You're muted. You're muted. Okay.
There we go.
Okay. Okay. So I can hear you, and I think everyone else can hear you. So we spoke on Saturday. That was one day after President Trump announced he has COVID. Since then, so Donald Trump is our president, age 74. He has symptoms and treatment. Melania Trump has mild symptoms. Bill Stepien, the campaign manager, has no symptom information. Kelly Conway has mild symptoms. Ronna McDaniel, the Republican National Committee chair, age 47, no symptom information. We have two senators, Mike Lee and Thom Tillis. Mike Lee said he has mild symptoms. We have no symptom information about Mr. Senator Tillis. Also, there's Ron Johnson, U.S. Senator, who says he's asymptomatic. Hope Hicks, senior aide to Trump, age 31, no symptom information. Reverend John Jenkins, president of Notre Dame University, age 66, no symptom information. Chris Christie is hospitalized. He said willingly, no symptom information. President Trump's press secretary, Kylie McEnany, she's asymptomatic. And Pastor Greg Laurie, the Harvest Church, mild symptoms. So all these people supposedly got it at a ceremony at the White House, which they call a super spreader event. So what is a super spreader event?
Well, with lots of diseases, you can have viruses that sort of go on average from one person to a few people, or you can have it where just a few people are giving it to a lot of people, and so this SARS-CoV-2, the coronavirus, seems to be more of the latter. In other words, most people who get the coronavirus don't pass it on, but there are people who do pass it on, and they can pass it on to quite a lot of people. And it doesn't seem that it's necessarily because somebody is, sort of a typhoid Mary who's prone to just spreading it a lot. It could just be more that the right person at the right time at the right place can create a super spreading event. In other words, as the virus is incubating, before symptoms set in, if somebody goes into a place an indoor place, ideally, where they can be close up to people for a long period of time, you can infect a lot of people. So it's not totally clear how all these people you mentioned got sick, because it's not like this one Rose Garden event where they all met the only time in the past couple of weeks. There was the presidential debate prep, where some of them were in an enclosed room. There was a march in Washington before the Supreme Court event, the Rose Garden. So there were a lot of opportunities where this could have happened. And that's why, contact tracers need to actually be really aggressively figuring out what happened. And unfortunately, the White House seems to be not using the full strength of this CDC for this. I don't know why. They are sort of having the White House's own medical staff do it with, they have one person from the CDC who's sort of their liaison. But this really needs to be sorted out. And, you know, for part of that, we need to know, when did the president himself get infected? We don't know when the last time was that he tested negative. They're not telling us. They're refusing to tell us.
Hmm.
And that could let us know how many people the president himself personally could have infected. You know, was
Okay.
he the patient zero, as it were, in these situations, or was he one of many people who got infected by somebody else? We can start to figure those things out if scientists get the information they need, but the White House is not giving us that information.
Well, we do know is that what his treatment has been. So Trump's therapies have been similar to those available to most other hospitalized patients, with two major exceptions. The president received a dose of an experimental drug only tried so far in about 2,000 people as part of a research trial. He's also gotten everything far sooner than would a typical COVID-19 patient. Soon after arriving at the hospital Friday evening, Trump was given the first of 5 doses of remdesivir, an antiviral. The drug is made by Gilead, and it was developed to treat Ebola. Less than 48 hours after his first symptoms, he has also received a dose of a monoclonal antibody made by Regeneron, which is a New York-based biotech company. The drug, REGN-CoV2, is intended to mimic the natural process of the immune system, providing with molecules called antibodies that your body normally manufactures to fight off specific diseases. Half an hour ago, he got on TV in a 5-minute video, which was recorded in front of the Oval Office, saying that catching COVID-19 was a blessing from God, leading him to the treatment he says left him feeling perfect. He said, and he cited Regeneron's antibody as the one that made him feel so good. It's very hard to get. Emergency access is granted only in rare and exceptional circumstances. And these drugs are also very expensive. So what do you think? And also he's on dexamethasone, which we all know is a corticosteroid, which can make people feel really good, and also give people mania and mood swings and basically Trump-like behavior. So what do you feel about how, so take it from when he started going to the hospital and the limited information that we do have. Most people don't get dexamethasone unless they're really sick. So what do you think about, what do you think about his treatment regimen, the way the doctors have handled this? Because his doctors have not handled it that well, but what do you think?
Well, it's kind of hard to judge how their choices, again, because we don't know how long he's been sick, and we don't really have a good idea of how sick he is. I mean, one of the most important pieces of information are lung scans when it comes to COVID-19. In China, when they were dealing with the disease, they actually sort of set up these huge sort of industrial scale, sort of basically sort of X-ray factories, as it were, where they would just like take scans of people's lungs, one after the other, because there's this very distinctive appearance that lungs have when people get pneumonia from COVID. And you can see how badly damaged they are. We haven't seen that. They're not releasing it. They just keep telling us that everything's great. So in the absence of that kind of information, it is kind of confusing, the mix of things that he's gotten. So, on the one hand, there is remdesivir. So remdesivir is an antiviral, which is basically known to stop viruses from making copies of themselves. And it has shown some effectiveness in reducing hospital stays for people. It's not actually formally approved for COVID-19, but there is like real research on it. The dexamethasone is a steroid which is used in a lot of different cases to treat sort of hyperactive immune systems. It's not something that you get prescribed lightly. You have to be very careful about it. Among other things, when people get off of dexamethasone, they have to taper off because it can have sort of addiction-like qualities to it. But again, there have been big randomized clinical trials that show that it too can be effective. Now, on top of that, Regeneron, as you mentioned, the antibodies, these are still in early clinical trials. They haven't had a big clinical trial that really shows definitively that it works. But there's certainly good reason to think they should work. Monoclonal antibodies as a general kind of medicine have been shown to be quite effective for a number of diseases. So it's not out of the bounds of possibility that it would work. But the thing is that like if some of these drugs are probably best if you give them to people early in disease, but dexamethasone is actually a drug that is been found to be effective for people who have pretty severe disease. In other words, they have to be on oxygen, they're on a ventilator. It really does help them a lot, but it shouldn't be given to people with early mild cases. It's even possible it might even cause some harm. So what's going on? They're also giving him zinc. They're giving him vitamin D. It feels to me, honestly, like a kitchen sink approach because there's no coherent rhyme or reason to why they're giving him all these things. And no one's ever gotten all these things in this combination before, ever. So how do they work in combination? It is possible that cocktails of drugs may be effective, but you actually need to do the science to know that. So if Trump is saying he feels great, why is he saying he feels great because of the antibodies that Regeneron makes? Maybe it's dexamethasone, which is super cheap and lots of people can take. I mean, he doesn't know. None of us can know. And none of us really know how well he is anyway. It's going to take days more to see if, as his own doctor said, he's not out of the woods. So we don't know.
Well, the cost for remdesivir, private insurance companies will pay $520 per vial or $3,120 for a 5-day course of treatment, while the company will charge the United States government $390 per vial or $2,340 per patient. For the antibodies, there is no price set, but they're usually very expensive. Cancer-related monoclonal antibodies often cost nearly $100,000 a year. For COVID-19, monoclonal antibodies expect to be orders of magnitude cheaper, likely on the order of a few $1,000s for a single dose regimen. So the White House physician is Sean Connolly, and I think he's not really communicating well with us. I mean, he said, I remember when they were saying, is he on oxygen? He said he's not on oxygen now. And then they said, well, is he on oxygen? He said it wasn't oxygen Thursday when he came in. I mean, he's just not really answering questions. And then he said he lied. He said he wanted to, so.
Well, he wanted to keep things upbeat. I guess
Right.
is how he put it. Yeah, no, this is not, we're in the business of science communication. This is not good science communication. And it doesn't stop. So just today, the doctor released a short update and said, basically saying everything was fine. Went to the effort of pointing out that that they detected a certain level of IgG antibodies to the coronavirus in his blood, Trump's blood. not really saying like, oh, is that good? Why is that good? He just like put it out there. So if you just look at it, you might say like, oh, antibodies, good, that's good, great. I guess he must be getting better. But as as lots of doctors on Twitter immediately pointed out, this is somebody who just had 8 grams of monoclonal antibodies shot into him. These are antibodies that are synthesized, which are specific to this coronavirus. That's how this works, is that, when people started getting sick with COVID early on, researchers would draw their serum and look at all the different kinds of antibodies they make, and then pull out all the ones that were specific to SARS-CoV-2, the coronavirus, and then of them, look for ones that had really, really strong effects, and then just synthesize that one antibody and have this pure dose of antibodies, which you then just shoot into people. That makes sense. That it's totally possible that has cured Donald Trump. I don't know yet. Nobody will really be able to pin it down because the clinical trials aren't done yet. But just to say today, oh, he's got lots of antibodies in him. Well, those aren't necessarily his. Those could just as easily be the antibodies that just got shot into him. And so, my colleagues at the Times have gotten in touch with Regeneron and other places, and they're like, yeah, that could be ours. So it's a bit like saying, like, we gave the patient Tylenol and we found some Tylenol in his bloodstream. Like, so what? So what? So, and we should not be asking so what in the middle of what is a national crisis.
So, okay, so we know the president really shouldn't be going to work with COVID-19. Every time, he should be really quarantining. Okay, so if you could sit down with his doctor, what were the questions you would ask his doctor?
When was his last negative test? Do you have an extra copy of the lung scans lying around? I would be curious to really know how he's doing now. Is he still having trouble breathing the way he looked like he had trouble breathing on camera when he returned to the White House? And I would ask him, why did you let him go home? This is not someone who should be home, let alone in a White House full of employees. It's not safe for him, and he's endangering other people.
And he's going to his office, not staying, and he should be quarantining. He's not doing that. All right, so the vice president, the debate that starts tonight, shouldn't Mike Pence be quarantining because he's been exposed?
Yeah, I mean, he's in charge of the coronavirus task force. Like, okay, his own organization is putting out rules. The CDC is putting out rules about what to do when you have been near somebody that has had coronavirus. Mike Pence has been around a whole bunch of people who are now known to have coronavirus. Like why he's leaving his house, I don't know. I mean, he's testing negative, that's fine, but like other people have been testing negative, and then the next day, third, fourth day, testing positive, because that's just how this virus works. And to say like, oh, I tested negative today, I can do whatever I want and just take in people's sneezes is just absurd. It doesn't make any sense at all. Yes, so this debate should be held by Zoom. That's it.
Well, we kind of realize that the president wants to put the pandemic behind him. And also by acting the way he is, he's saying, see, I was sick for a day or two and now I'm back at work. In the meantime, we have United States, we have 7.6 million cases, 211,000 deaths. And Dr. Fauci today said, if we keep going the way we're going, we'll have 400,000 deaths. So I have questions from the audience. And audience, if you have questions, these were questions submitted in advance, please put them in the Q&A box. Please don't put them in the chat box because that's just for Carl and I and Joe, just in case we have any issues or questions. So please put them in the Q&A box and I will get to them. So here's a question. They say Trump may have been infectious for as long as 72 hours. How do tests pick that up?
What tests can do is that they can detect the presence of a virus. And the reason that people are talking about how long he may have been infectious is based more on sort of studies of lots and lots of people, big epidemiological studies, and trying to work out the natural history of this disease. So it's known that you get infected and it'll incubate for a few days where you're not actually particularly infectious. But then there can be a couple days, 3 days where you are infectious, but you're not showing symptoms yet. Some people barely show symptoms at all, and other people start to get really sick. So the point being that before we found out that he had been diagnosed, if you kind of work your way back based on what do we know about the virus and what we're kind of figuring out about what happened at the White House over the past week, sure, he could have been infectious for 3 days. He could have been, it's not beyond the realm of possibility that he was infectious at the presidential debate.
Okay, and he was definitely infectious when he flew to Bedminster, New Jersey.
Right, and they're contact tracing in New Jersey now.
Okay. How prevalent are the treatments that Trump is receiving right now available for others with the same protocol that's being followed at Walter Reed?
Dexamethasone, which you mentioned, it's a steroid, and it's pretty common and it's pretty cheap. And so, again, the evidence we have so far indicates that it's clearly effective for people who are on oxygen or on a ventilator. So in those cases, I think that's becoming standard of care in a lot of places. Remdesivir has been, had some demonstration that it works, and so it's being produced in some amounts, but there are shortages. So in Europe, there have been some hospitals complaining that they can't get their hands on it, and so that's an issue. The monoclonal antibodies are the most experimental of what he got. And I mean, people are not, almost no one on earth has gotten these particular monoclonal antibodies yet because they're in very early clinical trials, relatively early clinical trials, I should say. They have been working on these for several months and have been putting out some data. But you can't just say, I want some of that Regeneron stuff. It just isn't there. It's just I forget the number. I think maybe 10 people have been able to get them outside of trials. I'd have to check that. Hopefully that changes very soon. But because a lot of people really feel that monoclonal antibodies could be, a key to really effective treatment. But and there are other companies that are working on theirs. Eli Lilly today just said they were going to apply for emergency use authorization for theirs because they're getting some good results. Vir has some that they're working on, a bunch of others as well. So that can't come fast enough. But there are some challenges to monoclonal antibodies. So one is that they if they work, they probably work best if you give them to people early on before they're making their own antibodies. So you just flood people with a bunch of really effective antibodies before their own immune systems have had a chance to ramp up, and that knocks the virus down, and then your own immune system can catch up. It's not easy necessarily to know when you're early in a course of COVID. You may not be showing symptoms yet. How would you know? Well, if you're the president and supposedly get tested every day, you might have a good idea. So if we all had at-home tests, That would be great. Every morning, take a test. Wouldn't even have to be 100% accurate, because like over the course of 2 or 3 days, you'd still get a positive test. And then say to your doctor, like, hey, I just tested positive. And they say, go over to CVS. I'm filing a prescription for you for your monoclonal antibodies. Start taking them right now. That would be great. But that would depend on a functional healthcare system, which we do not have in this country. The other problem is if you could get those things to work, there would be a huge demand because, unfortunately, because there are so many people who are sick with COVID. What is it? I think the daily rate is over 40,000 a day, new cases.
Mhm. Yeah.
So if all those people are going to be getting monoclonal antibodies, it's a huge demand. And there's a lot of skepticism whether these companies can get the manufacturing up to scale for that. It would be great if they could work, but there's a lot of problems that aren't really being addressed, unfortunately.
Okay, so do you know the actual qualifications of Sean Conley as a physician? My military friend said that he cannot say no to President Trump because of rank. Is that true? I don't know if that's true.
I'm not an expert on military medicine and
Okay.
the rules there. I mean, the president is the commander in chief, and he's not the only patient who might be kind of demanding of doctors. And there is something known as VIP syndrome, where if you're super rich, sometimes you end up getting really lousy healthcare because you are looking around for doctors who will give you what you want. You're making demands on them and so on. And so you just keep getting prescribed medicines that aren't actually doing you any good. So this definitely looks like a kitchen sink prescription of drugs. Was it because the doctor gave in to Trump's demands? I wasn't there in the room. I don't know, but somebody, there's something weird going on.
Okay. Why do you think Trump's doctors gave him the higher dose of Regeneron's antibodies when the lower dose was shown to be as effective for people in Trump's reported condition?
Again, what a great question that would be for a press conference with the doctor who has not had a press conference for the past 2 days.
No.
That would, I would add that to my list of questions that I would ask. Very good question. I don't know.
Right. Okay. What can happen if you are given dexamethasone when you are not seriously ill?
Well, it does have a whole host of side effects. I mean, it's a long list. And actually, if you go to National Institutes of Health has a pretty good site. I think it's called Medline. It's one of the Medline web pages where they describe dexamethasone and they have a list of side effects. It has a whole bunch of side effects that, they're not overwhelmingly common, but they can happen. It's a whole range of things from psychological side effects to physical ones. So it's not something that you enter into lightly. The real issue actually is not so much about giving dexamethasone to people who aren't sick. The issue may be with COVID in particular, when is it a benefit and when is it a risk? So it's possible that the reason that it seems to be beneficial when people are on oxygen or on a ventilator is because we know that is the stage at which your own immune system is kind of losing control. You're having a lot of inflammation. That's not the virus's fault. The virus could be basically gone at that point. But what's happening is that you are having this strange kind of runaway process with your immune system that scientists are still trying to figure out, what is driving it and what's sustaining it. So dexamethasone may be an effective way to tamp that down. But if you're in the early stages of the disease, you don't want to tamp down your immune system. You know,
Okay.
that's when you want your immune system to be reacting, killing infected cells, learning how to recognize and stop viruses. You want your immune system on full bore then. So these are, you know, these are hypotheses that you know, we still need to do a lot more research to figure out if that's actually what's going on. Because we only have just, you know, a couple clinical trials to go on for the data. But that might be the issue to think about with dexamethasone. And so, you know, again, I just want to stress, if that's the case, then if President Trump had a fairly advanced case of COVID, dexamethasone would make sense. If he had a pretty early case, then that would be probably a good time for remdesivir or monoclonal antibodies. Why you would give both to the same person doesn't make sense to me.
Okay. So the second presidential debate is scheduled for middle of October. So by then will we know if he's been actually over the hump, or he may still get a lot sicker.
Yeah, I mean, there is this. I mean, you know, the sad story of Herman Cain, another Republican politician, should be a cautionary tale, because he went to a Trump rally in Tulsa, didn't wear a mask, said, "Oh, this is great, they're having a great time," and then just within a few days diagnosed with COVID. Then a few days later said, "Oh, I'm doing great," and it was about a month, you know, the month of July, I believe, and then it took for him to go way south, and then he died. So, you know, Trump's own doctor has said that, you know, this week is really crucial to see if he's going to get better or not, because people, especially, you know, older people with COVID, may seem like they've gotten out of the woods, they've stabilized, and then kind of out of the blue, they start to slide down again, and then they crash. Why that is, it's not terribly clear, but that pattern is a pattern that you do see with people. So, so yeah, I think, you know, by the next debates, yeah, if that does happen, that might well happen by then, or not. I mean, you know, he could be an outlier. There are a range of outcomes. You know, he might not crash, but he might, you know, have really hard time breathing and talking. In which case, it just would not be good for his health to travel to a debate and talk for an hour and a half. He's sick. He needs to be resting.
So here's some questions for journalists. What do you think of Scientific American's editorial staff endorsing Joe Biden, the first and only endorsement in its 189-year history? Also, the England Journal of Medicine's editorial board said administration should be voted out, but did not mention any names, which is, well, okay. Normally, neutral organizations don't do this. So I remember there was a March of Science several years ago, and I got an email from my editor of Scientific American saying, we do not want anyone taking part in this from Scientific American. And so now we have a complete reversal. So what do you think of this?
Well, I mean, on the one hand, you know, one of the great things about science is it doesn't matter what your political party is or your religion is. You know, if you do science and you do it right, you're going to discover things. And if you present an experiment, you know, so if someone says, yeah, but are you a member of the Communist Party or not, should not be a valid question. And now the fact is that you know, science is not somehow distinct from politics. You know, the very ability that scientists have to do their science largely depends on politics, on politicians taking money from taxpayers and saying, you know what, we're going to take this money and give it to scientists. We are committing a political action because we think it's the right thing to do. Now, you know, the person who just sent in that thing might think, well, of course that's the right thing to do, but that's not an immediately obvious objective fact. That is a political choice. And, you know, we can see with this administration that there have been plenty of political choices when it comes to science. I mean, you know, they are stocking NOAA, for example, with climate deniers. Like, that's just a fact. The EPA is ignoring its own staff scientists to give a pass to chemicals that have been linked to you know, brain damage in children. And, you know, and when you ask them why, they're like, oh, well, it gets in the way of economic growth and so on and so forth. They're giving political reasons for what they're doing. So so I think it's so to claim that that scientists cannot have political opinions, to claim that magazines cannot have political views because they're writing about science is incorrect. On the other hand, you know, we don't want to become like the Stalinist Soviet Union, where politics could, you know, put a geneticist in jail because they believed in something called DNA. You know, we don't want that to happen either. This is an extreme year, and I think it's reflected in, you know, the editorials that you're seeing in Scientific American, in Science, in New England Journal of Medicine, and a number of publications.
Okay. How confident are you that the president is actually getting the treatments his doctors claim he did?
Well, you know, I'm not much of a conspiracy-minded person. You know, I have no, let me put it this way. I mean, I have no reason to think that he's not getting what they're saying he's getting. It's not like, you know, if they were saying we gave him, you know, ground unicorn horn, I might be a little skeptical, you know, but I don't see any reason for skepticism. And you know, I think the real question is, you know, the real scandal is that that they have, you know, his doctors have lied to us, and they have not given us the information we really need.
Yeah. I think also in the cocktail is melatonin,
Yeah.
Zinc, baby aspirin.
Yeah, I mean, you know, and again, like, you know, the New York Times, we have a treatment tracker for COVID, and you know, we have included things, and, you know, and given a sense of like what, you know, what is the quality of evidence that it's actually effective against COVID. And so, you know, for dexamethasone, we can point to these large, well-designed, randomized clinical trials and say, well, there's the evidence for that. For zinc, well, you know, there are experiments on cells in a petri dish where if you hit them with zinc, they don't get infected by another coronavirus, the one that causes SARS. Like, that's interesting, but the fact is that that's always just the beginning of research. You know, that's not proof that you should take zinc. It just isn't. You should go from there to maybe do some studies on animals. And if that works, then you're going to go to do studies on people, and they need to be good studies. And it's slow and it's expensive and it can be ambiguous, but that's science. And thinking you can take a shortcut and, you know, like the president declaring that Regeneron's drug cured him is going to make more people die.
Are there any possible fatal consequences of mixing all the medications President Trump has received in a relatively short period of time? I think it's a hard question to really answer.
Yeah,
We don't know. Yeah.
We don't know, but I mean, you know, but it's, I mean, that in itself is an issue. I mean, there are, you know, individual drugs that have been tested on COVID, and there are now trials to combine them, you know, so take remdesivir and try it out with, I forget which one. There's so many things to bear in mind. I think it's one of the monoclonal antibodies. No, it's a, it's what's called a cytokine inhibitor. So there's a trial going on. Like, let's combine these and see what happens then. Is it better in combination, or does that combination, as the viewer brought up, does that create some sort of synergy that's actually dangerous? You do a trial. Now obviously doctors have to have some leeway because they're there on the front lines and they're trying to figure things out. And, there are a lot of things that doctors have a feeling seem to be working, and that's, that's what doctors are going to do. But there has to be a lot of focus and support and organization to do more randomized clinical trials, and good ones. I literally just heard someone from the FDA say that the vast majority of the clinical trials for treatments for COVID that are going on right now are so badly designed that they'll be useless in terms of results. I think over 90% are, you can look at the design and just say like, well, this is pointless. So we have to do way better than that.
Okay. So someone wants to know, so the president has claimed he's tested every day and everyone around him is tested every day, but his chief of staff said that's not actually true. But what kind of tests are they using? I mean, I mean, it's obvious it must be a rapid test, but I don't know how effective they are.
Yeah. There's tests. There's one by Abbott, and there's one by another company whose name I'm blanking on. But these tests are, the reason they're rapid is because they're not incredibly accurate. They're just not. So, overall, they'll give you, they will give you a correct result, but they have a certain rate of false negatives or false positives. So it might tell you you're sick when you're not, or it might tell you you're healthy when you're sick. I mean, no one ever said like, oh, here's a great machine to make the centerpiece of your efforts to keep the White House free of coronavirus. So people would come in and they would, like at the Rose Garden ceremony, they would take this test nice and quick, over in 10 or 15 minutes, and they'd say, oh, negative, great. Go right in, no need for a mask because you're negative. That's absurd. Like these tests cannot stand alone like that. And now there are much more accurate tests, but they take longer. The holy grail would be, a home test that's cheap and it's super accurate and really fast. That would be great, but we're not there yet. So we have these trade-offs, and I don't know if the White House talked to a scientist about this plan to keep the White House safe. A scientist could have immediately told them this is a recipe for disaster, and we're looking at a disaster.
Okay. I just want to ask people. Carl is not a physician, and he's not doing active research. So please, try and limit your questions to these things. So someone said, I've heard that a vaccine will not be a silver bullet, and they may be given maybe only 50% effective. How long do you think we're going to be wearing masks and social distance?
It depends a lot on these trials that are happening right now, these advanced trials. Maybe there would be, maybe these vaccines are going to be super effective. And maybe people will embrace them enthusiastically, and we'll get herd immunity and things will be great. But, if we're in a sort of in-between zone where we have vaccines that are moderately effective and a lot of people are like, oh, I don't think I trust it, then, we're going to still be having some of the kind of measures that we have now. So, really, like, how long it lasts depends in part on the science and making the science work as safely and quickly as possible. And part of it depends on what we as a society do.
Okay. So when we spoke, a few months ago, you were kind of pessimistic. How are you feeling now about what's going on? Because it doesn't seem to be getting better.
Yeah.
Uh,
Oh yeah. No, we're in a, I mean, um, just comparing how we have done to other countries. I keep thinking back to South Korea because they had their first case when we did. It's a big country, 60 million people, very densely populated. Um, and they have a lot of scientists who it just so happens were trained in the United States. And we gave them some really good training and they used it uh, to come up with good tests and a good plan for not just for testing, but for contact tracing and snuffing out these outbreaks before they got out of control. Um, they recognized that they really needed to keep their medical staff well protected. Um, they've had, just a tiny fraction of the cases and of the deaths that we've had. And again, it was the same day that we had the same cases. Um, so now, we had the summer to really, really nail this thing, drive it down. And, you're in New York, I'm in Connecticut. And, I think these two states did pretty well. Um, Other states have not done well. Like, you look at a place like Wisconsin, they're setting up a field hospital because they're running out of bed space. We're having, over 40,000 cases a day. And that's before we all start going inside because it's cold. That's at the beginning of the school year. Yeah, this winter will be hard, and the next year will get better because we'll have vaccines. But I people can't just say like, oh, vaccines, everything's great again. It's going to continue to take coordinated public health efforts to keep people alive.
well, the other problem that I see with vaccines is that not everyone's going to receive the vaccine the same day, all at once. Some vaccines are I think 3 of the vaccines are 2 doses. So it'll maybe a while till you have immunity. Some people won't get it. And they said the earliest they're going to give vaccines to children are next fall of 2021. And they really haven't tested the vaccines in seniors. So there's a lot we still don't know about it. And so, but we do know what works, which is masks, social distancing, and hand washing. So here's another question about journalists. How much value is there in journalists and physicians speculating about the state of the president's illness based on the released information?
Well, we shouldn't, speculate wildly. But on the other hand, we do know a lot about how the course of this disease. And, it's not like it's not like there are an infinite number of possibilities for what the president's condition is. And we wouldn't be speculating like this if we didn't actually get information. And so, I think it is, I think it's entirely responsible just to say to people like, when people are breathing heavily when they're walking, when they have COVID, like this is, doctors who treat them, this is what they say about what that means. This is the president and we're coming up to an election. Like his health matters a lot. Now there is a long history of presidents and the people around them hiding their health problems. Woodrow Wilson, he like for a year and a half, he had like stroke and other problems. He was basically incommunicado and his wife basically like was running the show, and nobody knew it. So, this is a long running problem with the way presidents handle these things, but it's still a problem because he is the commander in chief. I mean, if someone you know, like, is he fit? I mean, there in the Constitution, there's discussion about, you know, the president being fit to serve. So, you know, it's a perfectly valid discussion to have of like, do the side effects of dexamethasone potentially make him, you know, give him, affect his decision making? Someone with the nuclear codes. I mean, are we not supposed to talk about that? I don't think so.
Well, there are other countries that we don't really know about the health of the leaders. Brezhnev was hospitalized for a cold, a very long cold, and then he died. And I remember Johnny Carson saying, boy, when he gets a cold, he really gets a cold. So, and there was another, I think Gorbachev also, and some others.
Death of Stalin is a great movie, highly recommended.
I enjoyed it too. So you've been basically writing on COVID-19 for months now, and what aspects of the pandemic and its repercussions have been ignored or incompletely covered by journalists? It's not really, I don't think anyone's, I don't like that question, but it's not that nice, you know, because I'm covering it too, but we try to our best, you know, so. Okay, what have journalists done well, and what would you like to see them do more, better? I'll reframe it. Okay.
Seems like, oh, there we go. You guys froze there for a bit.
Okay, you froze. Okay.
Oh, I froze.
You froze.
Oh, okay. Sorry, folks.
All right. Okay.
Great.
Okay. I don't hear you now.
Oh, okay.
Okay, now I do.
All right. All right.
So I guess the question was, what do you think journalists have done well, and what could they possibly do better?
I think that science writers need to understand politics and policy better. And I think that the political writers need to understand science better. You know, it's understandable that we're in our different fields, but we need to be having more crosstalk. And I'm having that experience with my own reporting. I mean, I used to be very much off and writing about parasites and dinosaurs and so on. And now I'm working with people who are regularly having, you know, conversations with sources deep inside the government and so on. And it's a different world for me. And I feel like I'm learning a lot collaborating with them.
Okay. So this is about question about the flu season. And I've heard the Southern Hemisphere had a record light flu season. Good news. Some think it might have been caused by people wearing masks or just a weak season. What have you heard about this?
Well, we do know that it was in places like Australia, there was practically no flu. I mean, it was just astonishing. And so it's doubtful that it's just, you know, that it was a weak flu season. Now, was it the masking? Was it the social distancing? Was it the hand washing? Hard to know. It's encouraging because we don't want a big flu season this year. So if we can keep up these measures, which we're not doing as well as Australia, we could drive down the flu this winter.
Well, I mean, you know, Dr. Fauci was saying that, you know, we come to accept that, you know, I think 60,000 people a year die of flu. And he said, maybe we should have been wearing masks all along. And other doctors have said that they think if everyone wears masks and social distancing, that will help with the flu no matter how severe it is, which it makes sense to me, you know, if you're isolated and all that kind of stuff.
We'll see.
We'll see. Yeah. So here's a question. So a lot of my friends have been talking about they're getting depressed because it's getting darker earlier. Outdoor dining is not going to be as possible as it was. I mean, I went to outdoor dining and the wind started picking up and it was a nice day, but it got colder very quickly. And then the food cools off. I think it's safer to dine outdoors, but you know, you can't do it in a blizzard. And
well, I would suggest that we look north.
okay.
You know, I went a few years ago, I was invited to give a talk in Ottawa. I'd never been there before. And I was really impressed by how, it gets cold there, obviously, and they don't stay inside. They have like bars set up along the river, and people will sort of ice skate up and down the river and stop in and have a drink, meet some friends, maybe have some food or so on. And so and they do a lot of this outside. So maybe we need to learn from our friends to the north how to be social in the cold, because we need it. We need to be with each other, but we can't be getting in, crowding in with dinner parties at each other's houses. We just can't. More and more people will die if we do.
So we're getting close to summing up. So what are you reporting on now, and what do you think, besides the president, and do you have any projections for what things are going to be like 5 months from now, 3 months from now, whatever?
3 months from now. Yeah, well, I am looking forward, just because, I've been writing a lot about vaccines. That's been one of the areas I specialize in. And, I helped to build this tracker because in June, we were having a hard time keeping track of I don't know, 10 vaccine projects or something. Now there are over 40 that are in clinical trials and dozens more coming. So in 3 months, what happens in 3 months? Pfizer has said that they might know if their vaccine works this month, maybe next month, we'll see. There could be, in January, you might see 3 vaccines that are applying for emergency use authorization or have received it. What then, and how do we manage that? This is again a chapter in history that we've never been through before. So I'm trying to think about what that chapter might look like, based on what we know about vaccines and about this virus and all the other things we know. But there's going to be a huge amount of randomness built into it. A lot of it depends on how good these vaccines turn out to be and how long they last. We don't know yet.
So a lot of people said to me, I look forward to the vaccines being approved, but I do not want to be the first to get it. Somebody has to be the first to get it. So,
well, you're not, just remember, you're not the first to get it.
Right.
Because thousands of people have already gotten it.
I know.
These vaccines that haven't been approved yet. Let's take Johnson & Johnson's vaccine. So they gave it to
50,000.
Yeah, right. But at first they gave it to maybe 50 people for phase 1, and then they gave it to about 1,000 people for phase 2. Now they're actually giving it to 60,000, not 50. So by the time they get an emergency use approval, if they do, well over 61,000 people will have already gotten it. Will be walking amongst us, without their heads falling off their shoulders. So the vaccines only actually get authorized or licensed after a huge amount of research on a lot of people already, a lot of volunteers. People volunteered for you to show you that this vaccine is safe. So take it so that you don't get sick and that you don't pass on this virus to someone else who dies.
Okay. So what if there are 3 vaccines that have emergency use authorization? How do you know which one to take?
That is such a good question. and yes, I am asking that question myself.
Okay. So I don't want to overextend your time, so I'll let you go. So why don't you sum up? And also, you have a new book coming out in the spring. Why don't you talk about that?
Yeah, it's called Life's Edge: The Search for What It Means to Be Alive. And it's basically, looking at how scientists are trying to figure out where the borderline is between life and everything else. And that might be the difference between life and death, the difference between living things and lifeless matter. You know, I had to take a break from it for a while when I started on my COVID coverage,
Mm.
but then I had a chapter to write about, you know, whether viruses are alive or not, and I suddenly had a really good virus to talk about. So, yeah, so that'll be coming out in March.
Okay, so maybe you'll sit down with me and we'll talk about that.
I'd love to. I'd love
That
to.
would be great.
My pleasure.
Okay, so thank you very much, Carl Zimmer, author and columnist for the New York Times, and thank you for your insights and sharing time with us. Stay safe. My regards to your family, and we're going to end this, and we'll be posting this on YouTube tomorrow. So for people who missed it or came in late, and talk to you soon. Thanks
All right.
again.
Take care. Bye,
Okay.
everyone.
Bye-bye.